This weekend at the box office, we had The Upside upset. No one's upset to see Holmes and Watson leave the top 20, and replicas just can't get audiences to show up to theaters.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is Mike Zupan, who is a creator of Bite Size Impressions, as well as Bite Size Cinema, longtime writer for DVD Talk, and writer for Minecraft Explorer and Fortnite Explorer. Mike, how you doing this week?
I'm doing excellent, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. This is the second episode of The Weekend Take, and what The Weekend Take is, we're going to look at the box office breakdown for the weekend, but also look beyond the numbers at the current trends, topics, and talking points of the film industry. So the way we like to start every show is we look at the movies that have left the top 20 that were in it previously. This week we have 3 such entries. The first of which is Instant Family, which dropped this week from number 20 to number 24 from Paramount. Instant Family took in $250,000, which was a drop of 64.4%. It lost about roughly half of its theaters, losing 280 theaters down to 324 for a cume of about $66.7 million. The second of those two was Creed 2 from MGM, which dropped from the number 19 spot to number 23. This week only taking in $291,000 on 355 screens, which was a 68.4 drop from last week, bringing its cume up to $114.9 million. And the third of the 3 films to leave the top 20, and the one that I'm most pleased to announce, Holmes and Watson dropped to number 21 from number 10 this week from Sony, taking in $555,000, dropping a staggering 83.2% from last weekend, due in large part to its huge theater drop of 1,767 theaters, dropping the film for a meager $548 per screen, bringing its cume up to just over $30 million in its third week of release. So, Mike, looking at these 3 films, are you surprised to see any of them have stuck in as long as they did?
Yeah, no, I'm not actually really surprised to see these movies drop the way that they did, especially Holmes and Watson. Holmes and Watson seems like one of those, as you were talking about last week, a direct-to-Netflix sort of thing, but even they didn't want it. I mean, $548 average per screen, losing almost 1,800 screens. I think that was pretty predictable. I mean, it's third weekend. That movie has a lot of bad press behind it, a lot of negative things said by the people who have seen it. Nobody seems to be really impressed by it critically, and it just never looked interesting to begin with. Creed 2, I mean, it's been in there for a while, a couple of months or so. So, I mean, it's not really too surprising to see that movie dropping at this point. You're probably going to start seeing the ramp up pretty soon for a home video release. So not too surprised there. Instant Family, I mean, 9 weeks at this point. So I'm not really too surprised to see that one dropping as well. It's time for it to start dropping and for other people to move in and take some of that box office take.
And also with the Golden Globes being last Sunday, looking ahead to this weekend, we knew that some of these films that were award nominees and award winners were going to get a bit of padding in their theater counts and a bump in their per theater averages, which to make room for them, others have to go. Let's start off the countdown with number 20.
Number 20.
So number 20 this week was Free Solo, taking in $812,000, a theater pad of 93 theaters to bring it up to 154 theaters. Very impressive, $5,278 per screen in its 16th week of release, bringing its cume up to $12.3 million. This film, a documentary which looks at Alex Honnold becoming the first person to ever solo climb Yosemite's 3,000-foot high El Capitan wall with no ropes nor safety gear, is considered to arguably be one of the greatest feats in rock climbing history. Sounds like it's a pretty thrilling documentary to check out. And now that it's gotten a little bit of a theater boost, we'll see where it goes from there.
I'll chime in here, Sean. Free Solo, I mean, it's kind of surprising that it's got this kind of a boost this week. I mean, yeah, it's really exciting. I think this film is actually being shown in IMAX screens, though. That might have something to do with it. But yeah, documentaries are really good. And to see it still pulling after 16 weeks or so, over $5,000 per screen. I mean, there are movies that come out that would really like to be pulling that kind of money. Yeah, really surprising, but it's definitely on my radar. This kind of thing looks like it'd be exhilarating on the big screen or even the small screen once it comes to home video.
And speaking of the per theater average, I mean, that $5,278 is actually nearly the highest per screen average of any of the films in the top 20. The only one topping it is our number 1 film this week, The Upside.
Number 19.
So moving on to number 19 this week is Mary Queen of Scots from Focus Features, down from the number 12 spot to number 19. It took in $847,000, which is about a 60% drop from last week, losing 223 theaters to now play in 829 screens, just over 1,000 per screen for a cume of $15.2 million. Now, we talked about this film last week on the show, and the parallels it runs with The Favorite, a somewhat period piece, not meant to be historically accurate along with The Favorite, but entertaining all the same and with strong performances put in by its female leads. The primary difference, I think, between Mary Queen of Scots and The Favorite is Mary Queen of Scots last week at the Golden Globes did not take home a statue, whereas The Favorite did. Olivia Colman bringing home Best Actress for Musical or Comedy for her role in The Favorite. Mike, have you seen or are you planning on seeing either Mary Queen of Scots or The Favorite?
I have not seen either of them. I would like to see both. This kind of goes back to what I was saying right at the top of the show, the interesting thing about the Rotten Tomatoes scores and how they reflect on these films. And it's also interesting to see that these films kind of tracking so closely together, because last week they were spots 13 and 12, The Favorite and Mary Queen of Scots respectively, and this week they're 18 and 19. And there's a couple reasons for that. You know, you got some other stuff that's new that's still doing really well, and then you have the shakeup with the award season and everything that's drawing some interest in some films that have been around for a while. But The Favorite, Mary Queen of Scots, it seems the critical take on these has been vastly different, but I think that they sort of appeal to a similar demographic and also turns off another demographic entirely. I think there's a lot of people that see trailers for movies like this and they see a lot of people in that old style clothing and the wigs and everything. They say, oh, look at this, a bunch of stuffy people wearing wigs, and I'm just not interested in that. Want nothing to do with it. But, you know, these seem to be the kind of films that get released to appease the people who like good characterization, good story, and like something that's a little, I shouldn't say historically based because they're not exactly factual, but, you know, something that's a time period piece.
Number 18.
And so that does bring us to number 18, which is The Favorite, down from number 13 this week from Fox Searchlight. The Favorite brought in $1.1 million, only a 40.9% decrease from last week, only taking a small marginal hit on its theaters of 259 theaters drop for a per-screen average of just under 2,200 and bringing its cum to $21.5 million. Now, I do think The Favorite, bringing home a Golden Globe, has a lot to do with the smaller drop and the higher per-screen average. I mean, that tends to be the trend when you're talking about awards season. Whenever a film gets nominations, and especially when it wins awards, it does drive an audience to the theaters to check it out. There has to be a reason why this film was so good. If a committee of people who know what they're talking about say that this film is superior to the others in that regard, the natural want of a theater goer is to see what all the buzz is about. I do suspect that The Favorite may end up dropping out of the top 20 when we report next week, only because of the fact that it's playing in so few theaters. The award win buzz will kind of worn off a little bit come next week, and it's so close to the threshold now that I suspect that it'll be dropping off.
I think you're right about The Favorite dropping out of the 20 next week. You know, this seems to be the time of year where a lot of people sort of just, I don't know, they kind of take a break from watching movies. You know, you have a big spring and summer rush, and then you get a lot of movies that are trying to get pumped out for the award season later in the year. And then here we are, we're at the beginning of the year of 2019, and you're looking at just whatever films are going to be, I mean, obviously these films came out before the new year, but we're looking at a season where a lot of films get dumped in the theaters, or at least the perception is that they're getting dumped in the theaters. And people look at that and say, these must be the films that these studios don't have a lot of confidence in, or that they're not going to be able to be that marketable. So here they are. So yeah, I think people are sort of taking a break and kind of leaning off of the movie theater thing right now, since it's just January.
I agree. January is a time period where you're going to see a lot more genre films come out, period pieces, horror films, and just the award season holdovers as we move from the Golden Globes and transition into the Academy Awards coming up. It is a time period for a lot of studios to either just release things that they've been holding on to, or release things that they're going to just take a chance on to hopefully get audiences to show up.
Number 17.
Moving on in the countdown, now we look at a film that has already had a terrific theatrical run up to this point, and because of an awards win is getting boosted back up into the top 20. So this week at number 17, up from number 22, is A Star Is Born from Warner Brothers, which took in $1.1 million, a 78.5% increase from last week, as it gets 126 theaters added back to its total, bringing it to 394 screens, a $2,800 per screen average to bring its cum up to $203.6 million. Now, this film is in its 15th week of release and is seeing a bump. This is clearly the result of the award season buzz.
Clearly.
As you know, Shallow, from the film's soundtrack, a duet between Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, took home the Golden Globe for Best Original Song. So even an award that's not directly related related to the film itself. What you see on screen has an impact on its box office performance.
Not only that, but I think A Star is Born is a film that when people tune into the awards, you see a pretty wide mix of films that are nominated and winning awards in different categories. But A Star is Born, I think, is the most palatable film for people to walk away from. You have Lady Gaga, that entices a lot of pop fans, music fans, anybody who basically turns on the radio and hears modern music these days. A lot of people like Lady Gaga. Her music kind of appeals to a wide range of people. Bradley Cooper, he's got a pretty good career behind him as an actor, and people like him genuinely because of his on-screen and even his, off-screen personality when he's doing interviews and stuff like that. It's a good drama film. It seems like it's a good sort of a lighthearted film, so possibly a good date movie, and just based on word of mouth alone, a good movie overall. So I think this is a movie that anybody can sort of get into and feel like, I'm going to walk away with this happy. They don't feel like they're sort of playing the lottery by buying a movie ticket with this.
So another point about A Star is Born, and this lends itself to a conversation that was had last week, is it's an intellectual property that's already been made. I mean, this iteration of A Star is Born with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper is, I believe, the third time that the film's been made. How does the studio change it up a bit to differentiate it enough from the previous versions of the film to attract a new audience? Or are they just banking on the fact that enough time has passed since the last time we saw A Star is Born that people just won't remember that it's already been made?
I think it's sort of the latter, because I have noticed with talking with a lot of people that they're not aware at all that A Star is Born is not exactly a new thing. But, compared to something else like The Grinch, everybody knows The Grinch. So, you have those marked iterations that people remember. It doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or if you're 25 years old or if you're 55. Everybody knows of, the book, the animated classic with, Boris Karloff, and everybody knows the Jim Carrey version and now this animated version. There's a very recognizable history with something like that. But A Star is Born, this is sort of a generational thing. I think people had to have been aware of those previous iterations and had to be around for whatever buzz those films created, where there's a whole new generation or two of people who have never even heard of this film that are catching on now, and their first taste of it again is, ooh, Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper, and the trailer actually looks good and moving and sort of sad at the same time. Like, this could be something. So I think it's a little of column A and a little of column B.
It brings up something that I completely hadn't noticed. The Grinch actually is another one of the titles that dropped out of the top 20, but
it's not even on the list.
It's not even on the list, which means Universal failed to even bother to report the weekend take of The Grinch this weekend, which to me feels like it almost got pulled out of every theater it possibly could. The fact that it's not even being reported, and it's not just 20 films that get reported. I mean, I'm looking at a list of about 35 films that studios report on, and The Grinch is not on that list, which it's not surprising because, the holidays are well over and The Grinch's time is coming past, and so there's no reason to report it. So we'll add that as a fourth film that left the top 20 this week was The Grinch.
It's very calculated, by the way, because they knew that this was going to happen, being that the holidays were over and that kids were going to be back in school. They've already released a press release saying that film's going to be available on home video February 5th, which is less than a month away. So that's what they're gearing up for.
Number 16.
So moving on to the countdown to number 16, down from number 8 is Second Act from STX Entertainment, which took in about $1.6 million, a 65.7% drop from last week. It lost roughly 33% of its theaters, losing 842 theaters with a $970 per screen average and bringing its cum to $36.3 million. Now, this was a talking point last week on the show because of the fact that STX didn't put a ton of marketing into this film, but it thrived on its own. And part of the conversation was, well, was it the attraction and the fan base that someone like Jennifer Lopez, who plays the lead, has? But now to see now in its fourth week of release, such a drop of 66%, I guess fan base only takes you so far?
I guess so. And not only that, but I mean, there's the reason why it's still kind of hanging in there respectably enough is that, after 4 weeks, I mean, this is the sort of movie that anybody who's interested in seeing this, they're going to go right away. They're going to go within the first few weeks. And we're seeing that here with the box office numbers with a 65% drop. But also, this is, again, another product that appeals to a very specific demographic. Again, it's that date night movie. It's a movie that's going to appeal to people who aren't tired of seeing romantic comedies yet. And I hate to make that sound like such a bad thing, but a romantic comedy for me has to be something special. And a movie like this, doesn't seem to present itself that way. When I see second act, I just think Jennifer Lopez, she's in yet another movie that's probably, I'm just guessing, boy meets girl. One of them's not who they appear to be. And then, you know, they hug and make up at the airport at the end of the movie sort of thing, you know? That does not appeal to a ton of people. Couple that with the fact that word of mouth and that critical scores for this movie have not been overwhelmingly positive, it's not surprising to see this movie dropping like it is.
Now, do you think, talking about the film that came in just behind it, A Star is Born, do you think the award win and the bump in theater count played to some of second act's demise this week?
Yeah, I think this is just sort of the second act sort of going through, well, it's second act at the box office. I think it's just sort of doing this on its own.
I agree. I mean, STX Entertainment, they achieved a goal with second act. The film's taken in $36.3 million on a $16 million budget. You figure, you look at that number, you look at what it'll do for the remainder of its theatrical run and then into video on demand and DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming release. And this will be a profitable property for STX when all's said and done.
It will, and it's why these movies continue to get made, honestly, you know, because you have a lot of people who do like this sort of film. It's a very specific type of person, I think. They're popular enough where they could keep churning these things out, and as long as they're profitable, they're going to keep making them.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 15.
So moving on to number 15 in the countdown is a Green Book. Green Book stays right put where it was last week at number 15 from Universal, taking in just over $2 million. The film saw a 16.1% increase from last week, including 176 theaters added to its theater count, for a per-screen average of just over $2,800 and a cum of $38.5 million. Green Book is another one of those films that benefits from the awards season. Last Sunday at the Golden Globes, Green Book took home 3 Golden Globes, one for Best Picture, one for Best Screenplay, and one for Best Supporting Actor. So when taking that into account, seeing an increase in not only its weekend take, its per screen average, and its theater count, it does make sense that this film would either stay put or climb the way that A Star is Born did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with a film like this and taking home the awards that it took, that's going to pique everyone's interest. Those are pretty big categories to win in. What's going to be interesting to see is how this film is going to fare moving forward. I'm pretty sure that with the awards being out of everybody's system, you're probably going to see it start to drop again next week. But also, there's a little bit of controversy stirring over this film as of within the last 24 hours or so. Nick Vallelonga, the Golden Globe winning writer of the critically acclaimed drama Green Book, as written by CNN, has had to apologize for a tweet from 2015.
Here we go again.
Yeah. He made a post to Real Donald Trump saying that he was 100% correct. I'm assuming about something about 9/11, because he goes on to say, Muslims in Jersey City cheering when towers went down. I saw it as you did, possibly on local CBS News. And Jordan Horowitz responded, Nick Vallelonga wrote Green Book. My industry just gave him a Golden Globe for writing. This remains on his timeline. With that kind of thing starting to get drummed up now, we're seeing a lot of this stuff where comments from years ago are sort of popping up to bite people, and that could impact the film negatively, but it didn't seem to affect the film that we're going to be talking about a bit later, though. But this seems like a little bit more of a serious take. So, yeah, we'll see.
What is your take on this? I mean, should everyone be held accountable for everything that they've said in the history of their social media like that? I mean, people grow, people change, people's tastes change, people's opinions change. Do we really have to hold everyone to what they said verbatim years past? Now, granted, in this case, it's only 3 years ago, but you look at something like what happened with James Gunn. Those were tweets from 10 years ago. You look at something like what's going on with Kevin Hart, which I'm sure we'll touch on when we get to later in the countdown. Is this something that we have to hold every public figure accountable for, every word they've ever said on social media?
I don't think this is something that you can sort of make a rule set for. I don't think it's sort of a black and white thing. You know, I think this is something that kind of has to be handled on a person by person basis, where something like this, who knows what he said in the past? This might be the only thing he said that could infuriate people. And if this is all that he said in this sort of situation, he's basically saying something that he saw as an, oh, I saw this happen. So is that a Islamophobic thing? Is it a racist thing? Is this person a racist? I don't know. I don't know the person well enough, and I don't know enough of their social media history to be able to determine that. Where you have someone like maybe like Louis C.K. on the other hand, who's been in trouble because he has repeatedly put himself in uncomfortable situations with females, you can say, hey, there's a pattern there. This person, maybe not that cool. Same thing with Harvey Weinstein on a much grander scale, of course. In this case, It's hard to say, but I will throw out there that if we stop enjoying pieces of art as art because there are scummy people attached to them, we're not going to enjoy anything that's out. There's a lot of films that I personally enjoy that have scummy people attached in roles, whether it's directing or even lead actors, that I'm still going to continue to watch. Like, I'm not going to stop watching Braveheart because Mel Gibson is anti-Semitic. At some point, we kind of have to make the disconnect, because it's not just one person that's behind these films. It's many people. So many people that work on these productions, and to undermine the entire thing because of one person, maybe put forth the effort to kind of give the director and the actors and the other players involved their credit, instead of just letting go of the film mentally and emotionally because of the writer. That's my take.
Number 14.
Moving on to number 14 in the countdown, down from number 9 this week, is Ralph Breaks the Internet from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $2.2 million, a 52.6% drop from last week, per theater average of $1,425, bringing its cume up to $190.4 million in its 8th week of release. Now, this film has already passed its predecessor, and as I said last week, I really feel just sets up a time frame for Buena Vista and Disney to complete the trilogy and make it Wreck-It Ralph 3, which I'll be perfectly fine with, because I sat with my daughter and watched Ralph Breaks the Internet, and I enjoyed it. I did feel that a lot of it was topical for current, and if you look at this film 5 years from now in a viewing, a lot of it won't be as funny as it is watching it now in late 2018, early 2019. I think looking at the film's performance, and even in its 8th week of release, really shows how it stands up to other fare that appeals to the same demographic. Like later in the countdown, we're going to be looking at Mary Poppins Returns, Bumblebee, even Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and A Dog's Way Home. These are all films that can be considered family films, and yet here's Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, still holding strong. So does that speak more to the strength of the film or the weakness of the other films in that pool?
I think one of the major things here is brand. It's a Walt Disney film. You know, I don't remember. Is Wreck-It Ralph? I don't think that's a Pixar film, right?
It's Disney's animation. It's not Pixar.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, and for a long time, you know, if Disney were to try something like that way back when, because they had Pixar in their piggy bank, you know, making films for them, you know, maybe it wouldn't go over so well. You know, Disney had that weird transitionary period where they were still trying to do traditional animation while Pixar films were taking off, and it was just like, I don't really know if I want to see Brother Bear. I mean, you know, there's Toy Story. Let's go see Toy Story, you know? So I think Disney has ever since, though, especially with Frozen exploding like it did, and the first Wreck-It Ralph doing as well as it did, and received as favorably as it was. I mean, I saw Wreck-It Ralph, and I thought that was a pretty entertaining, it was a good film all around, very well done. It wasn't weak sauce by any stretch of the imagination. So between the brand of Disney, between how people felt about Wreck-It Ralph, I just think that it's sort of natural to see this doing as well as it's been doing. But it's interesting that you brought up the whole internet thing and seeing how some things may fall out to be irrelevant in the future.
Yeah, or I mean, even by the time it comes out on home video release, I don't even think that looking ahead to by the time it's home video release, some of those things may have already fallen out by then. But we'll see if it stands the test of time upon its release.
Number 13.
Coming in at number 13 in the countdown, up from number 14 this week, is If Beale Street Could Talk from Annapurna Pictures, bringing in just under $2.4 million, a 29.6% increase from last weekend, getting a huge theater pad of 683 screens to bring its total to just over 1,000 screens, a $2,300 per screen average to bring its cume up to $7.6 million. Now, this film also benefits from the awards season, as last Sunday at the Golden Globes, Regina King took home Best Supporting Actress. I think If Beale Street Could Talk and its success in this award season, both in the Golden Globes and looking ahead to when the nominations come out for the Academy Awards, certainly bolster the brand of Barry Jenkins as a director and will allow him to make the stories and films that he wants to make for some time to come.
This director seems to have his tap on a couple of different things. Number one, just an emotional film that's going to tap into people, something that people are going to be able to relate to, or see something on the screen that they can relate to, and something, filmmaking that's actually going to make people feel something. I mean, that's something that you don't get a lot today, especially when it comes to, you know, the bigger Hollywood films that come out. I mean, you know, obviously we're going to talk about it later, but, you know, Aquaman right now is almost reigning supreme right now, you know, week after week, and that's a very different kind of film though. But you give somebody a film where they know, based on the Golden Globes, based on how the critics are just falling over themselves to praise a film like this, people are going to be genuinely interested, especially when you tell them that the script is good, the acting is good, the story is good. I mean, this is a film about, someone basically supporting something when they're convicted for something that they didn't even do. And it's 2019. In 2019, while it's not the same sort of thing, somebody being arrested for something that they didn't do versus some of the other allegorical connections that you can make to modern society, it's very important in 2019 with the way that society is changing, with acceptance and allowing things and characteristics of people to flourish like never before. We're still very much in a time where people need to be there for each other, to sort of support one another. And I think that message is very strong with people. And I think that's why a film like this can latch on to people and do well. Yes, obviously it's got an almost 30% bump this week because of the Golden Globes, but I think this director, moving forward, they've got something. If Beale Street Could Talk, definitely a film I'm interested in seeing as soon as I can get my hands on it on home video, which is going to be a little while because it's only been around for about 5 weekends now. But I'm really happy to see this one thriving and getting the boost because of the critical acclaim.
Yeah, I mean, you may have to wait even longer because I'm sure once the Academy Award nominations will come out, regardless of how many theaters, if Beale Street Could Talk is down to, you'll see a boost in it immediately, I feel. But I mean, something like If Beale Street Could Talk, going back to one of the points you made, is I think right now it's a film that a lot of people need. It's this film about supporting one another. And right now in the news and everywhere, everything is very divisive. People are literally and figuratively trying to or putting up walls between everyone. And so a film where it's like, no, we have to have this support. It's just something that I think people need. I mean, that was one of the things that made cinema so great, and record numbers of moviegoers went out to the movies during one of the worst times in this country at all, which was during the Great Depression, because movies are a distraction. Movies give you something that you're not getting in real life. And I think if that's the message of If Beale Street Could Talk, then that's a message that people want to hear and may need. And so they're turning out in droves now to go see this film.
This is partially why cinema is so fascinating and why I've always been so interested in film, because some people see cinema as it's just a way for me to kill a couple of hours and turn my brain off. It's why films like Transformers continues to make money, film after film after film after film, despite the fact that everybody's out there being like, man, that Michael Bay sure does suck. He just does the same old stuff. The cars go vroom and the explosions go, but why is he still making money? Because there's all different kinds of people out there, and some people go to the movies for that because, yes, they want to be entertained and because it is a break from their lives. But it's interesting to see films like this that are grounded in a reality that sort of echoes our own, because people want to feel that emotional connect that they're not seeing in their day-to-day lives, because they're seeing so much hate perpetuated by social media, by the news and whatever else that people are able to tap into on their phones or their TVs or their computers on a daily basis. So,
Number 12.
Our next film on the countdown at number 12, which is the first of the 3 new releases of the week, is
oh boy,
Replicas, starring Keanu Reeves. The film only took in $2.5 million on over 2,300 screens for a measly $1,073 per screen. Now, last week, I predicted that Replicas was going to perform not tremendously. It wasn't going to set the world on fire, but I thought it was going to do a little bit better than this. And I'm sure even Keanu Reeves, the film's lead, thought it was going to also, because looking at Keanu Reeves' history at the box office, Replicas ranks really near the bottom. I mean, everything he's released has been far more successful in its opening weekend than this. Even looking at something that's got a comparable amount of screens, the lowest anything previous to this has done is you look at Chain Reaction. Okay, Chain Reaction opened in 2,255 screens. So about 100 screens fewer than Replicas did, but Chain Reaction opened to 7.5 million, and that was 7.5 million is in $1996. Replicas is really a low point at the box office for Keanu Reeves' career. Now, does that mean that Keanu Reeves is no longer a box office draw? No, I don't think that at all. I think
absolutely not. And people are going to be reminded of that in May when John Wick 3 comes out. When I saw the trailer for this movie and leading up to this weekend for its first weekend to see how it was going to do, I was very curious, because seeing the trailer, while the aspect of what the story was going to bring to the table was interesting to me, I also recognized that I didn't know who this marketing was going to speak to.
Marketing aside, people still have to go see this movie, and people did go see this movie. I mean, it made 2.5 million, and the people coming out of that movie are not helping the film's cause. The film only has a score of 13% on Rotten Tomatoes and has a C on Cinema Score. So it's average at best based on audience review, and based on critic reviews, it's being panned by critics hard. Not nearly as hard as Holmes and Watson, but
yeah, the critical response certainly doesn't help. And I just checked, $30 million for the budget. So this film has a ways to go if it hopes to make any money back, because it's not just the $30 million budget. You got to take marketing into consideration as well.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that a lot of people don't think about when looking at box office returns is you see a film made X amount of dollars and you saw their production budget was also X. So it's like, oh, they broke even. But that's not really how it goes. I mean, generally the rule of thumb is whatever the reported production budget is, you have to times that by 2.5 just to get to what a studio would consider its break-even point. So you look at something like Replicas with a reported $30 million budget, that film needs to make $75 million for the studio to feel like they broke even.
Yeah, and I mean, I literally had a conversation on a website earlier today about the film from last year, The Predator. That was a film that I think roughly had whatever its budget was. I think it was maybe about $80 million. And the film, I think roughly, domestic and international takes and everything came to about $160 million. And they're like, oh, well, that movie roughly doubled, the investment that the studio made on it. I'm like, how do you figure? $80 million is just a production budget. And if you want to go by the rule of they roughly double that for marketing, that film had to make more than $160 million in order for the studio to say, yes, this is a success, or even to say, we made our money back. Because The Predator, I think, had a decent amount of advertising at the time. So I don't think they were skimping on the marketing for The Return of Predator. They went for it. They wanted this to be a big event tentpole film. And The Predator, I don't see how you consider that a financial success, unless, of course, you're someone who doesn't understand that marketing has to be taken into consideration. I run into this conversation all the time, and it's maddening.
Number 11.
So moving on to the countdown to a film that is of success at the box office and is making its studio a lot of money. At number 11 is Bohemian Rhapsody from Fox, which stays put right at number 11, taking in another $3.2 million, a 35% increase from last week as it gets a little bit of a theater pad thanks to the award season. It gets 254 screens added to its count, bringing the count up to 1,334 screens for just under 2,400 per screen average. Its cum sits at $198.5 million. That's just domestic. Taking into account foreign gross, the film worldwide has made just over $751 million worldwide. Now, this film is a rarity in that not only is it commercially successful, it's critically successful, and it's successful at the awards. Bohemian Rhapsody taking home Best Picture and Best Actor for Rami Malek's portrayal of Freddie Mercury. So you look at something like this, and you want to say, well, big studio pictures can still be award winners, because we're currently in a trend, at least for the last 5 years, where your big awards went to small films. Here we see Bohemian Rhapsody, which for all intents and purposes, as far as I'm concerned, is a musical. It's a biopic about an incredible artist and musician. And this also still sits atop my list of films that I absolutely need to see. And so how about yourself, Mike? Have you seen this film? Do you want to see this film?
I have the same response for a lot of these movies. I have not seen it. I'm much more of a home video guy these days. There are certain films that I'll go out to witness in theaters, but I'm kind of spoiled. I feel like I get better picture quality at home, better sound quality. Well, maybe not better sound quality. It's good enough for me at home, I'll say, with a 7.1 surround sound system. And also, I don't have to deal with the theater experience. I very much want to see this when it comes out on home video for sure. I think it's interesting, by the way, that you said, as far as you're concerned, that it's a musical, even though it's a biopic. I can see why you'd say that. I'm not sure I agree, but that's interesting. There's a lot of films like this that have come out in the past. I don't really remember what the critical take was when those movies came out, but I think as far as public perception was concerned, there's been other movies in the past that have done well enough, I think, box office wise, and as far as how people felt about the films in general. I think Joaquin Phoenix in I Walk the Line, Jamie Foxx doing Ray, and of course, this is Bohemian Rhapsody. This is Queen. This is Freddie Mercury. Like this, who doesn't love Queen? Like, this is a very intriguing history behind this artist, this band. It's a band that's still going today, not with Freddie, obviously, but somebody who seems to fit the shoes very well for that kind of a singer.
Stemming off of something that you said, and I think this will segue really nicely into our segment about you and what you do, is how do you decide what films you do make that effort for to go to the theaters and see?
I'm the kind of person who's like, I'd rather sit down and watch something that's cinema, that's art, that's thought-provoking. But if I'm gonna go to the movie theater, it's usually to experience something that's, I think, is really befitting for a big screen. Like, I'm still very much about seeing like the Jurassic World franchise on the big screen, Star Wars, stuff like that. But for the most part, and Halloween, because I had to see that in the fall, because like Halloween is like one of my favorite movies of all time. So to see that kind of hey, let's forget about everything that happened after the first movie and just, do this the right way, that appealed to me enough to get me into the theater. But generally speaking, I watch about 98% of the movies that come out at home these days. It has to be something special, probably something that I'm nostalgically tied to.
And so that segues into our discussion about you. So I know I introduced you at the beginning of the show as being the creator of Bite Size Impressions and Bite Size Cinema. You're also a longtime writer for DVD Talk. I think you said roughly 12 years now you've been writing for them, and also a writer for Minecraft Explorer and Fortnite Explorer. Tell us a little bit about Bite Size Impressions and Bite Size Cinema.
Well, I mean, it stems back to DVD Talk first and foremost. I started, I've always been interested in film. I've ever since I was young, I've collected tons of, home video releases. Every step of the way, I was always adapting to the next big thing and spending way too much money on stuff that I probably shouldn't have been buying. But yeah, at that point in the mid 2000s, I was like, I really want to get into putting my opinions out there in a format on a platform where it makes sense, where people are going to see that and respond to it. I've always been a writer, so that intrigued me very much. So I did that for a very long time, but I felt like after doing it for so many years, I was like, I'm sort of starting to fall into this trap, this groove of, I feel like I'm writing the same things over and over and over again, even though it's about different films, which means maybe I'm not diversifying my writing enough. Maybe just doing reviews I need a little bit of a break. I'm also a big gamer, so I went off in the meantime and I created Bite Size Impressions, where I just basically write opinion pieces about video game industry things. Occasionally I stream, occasionally I do a podcast, but it's more about the opinion piece stuff that I throw up on the website. But of course, DVD Talk is sort of a reflection of how the film industry, or at least the home video aspect of it, has been responding to market trends over the years. So these days, the clicks on the website are very low. The screeners that we get sent from the studios, we don't get as many as we used to. Like, things have really changed in that respect. So I don't get to write as much of the films that I want to write about these days. So I said, well, Bite Size Impressions is there. I'll start a sister site, Bite Size Cinema. That way, any of the films that I don't get to write about for Bite Size Impressions, I can do over there. Also, films I don't get to write about for DVD Talk. So that site exists there as a sister site. It's easily accessible from the top of my website, which is bitesizeimpressions.com.
And just to be clear, that's Bite with a Y.
Yes, Bite with a Y, all one word, bitesizeimpressions.com. So I was doing the video game writing thing, and then after a while, it's just sort of making friends who had similar interests, and that's how I sort of got picked up to write for the Minecraft and the Fortnite Explorer magazines that you mentioned at the top of the show as well. So cinema has always been my primary passion, though. So yeah, here I am.
Now I know you got something coming over the horizon as well, right? As a writer?
Yes. This is only going to be over in the Italian market, which is kind of weird because it had to be translated for that market. But I wrote a book for pretty much the biggest Italian publisher over on that side of the globe. It's a Crash Bandicoot book. I can't really say much more about that. It's supposed to be coming out tentatively in February, but dates have changed as they often do, and it may change again, but it's in the can. It's been translated. I think they're just looking for the right time to release it. My question was, when they wanted this, was like, why Crash Bandicoot in 2018 at the time that I was starting to write it? And apparently it's still very popular over there. And I guess now with the Crash remaster that came out last year and the Crash Team Racing remaster that's coming out this year, I guess it makes sense. I'm hoping that they'll say, hey, this is kind of maybe relevant enough elsewhere. Maybe we'll actually release the English version that you wrote elsewhere in the world. That would be nice.
Are there any other titles or properties in the gaming world? Like you said, you've written for Minecraft Explorer and for Fortnite Explorer. You have this Crash Bandicoot book. What are some of your favorites that, if you given the opportunity, you would write about?
I would love to write about The Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. Yeah, Legend of Zelda, I think, would be my dream project, with Sea of Thieves just behind it.
And just quickly marrying the idea of video games and film, are you surprised at all that with everything else getting a big screen adaptation? I mean, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog coming out in the next year. Are you surprised that we haven't had a Legend of Zelda big screen adaptation?
I'm not entirely surprised. I mean, back in the day, they tried their hand at a Nintendo sort of video game turned film thing, and it was disastrous. I don't think anybody looks at that Super Mario Brothers movie and said, yeah, I like that movie. Yeah. Oh, that totally reminds me of the video game. you know? Oh, and Dennis Hopper, that he was Bowser with a weird blonde haircut. I don't know. They had Goombas that were like 8 feet tall but had tiny heads. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
I think for sure if they ever did a big screen adaptation, that the creators have to be involved with the studio from the get-go.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, though, because they are working with Nintendo, the creator of Mario Brothers, or at least somebody who's been heavily involved in that franchise. They're doing a CGI Super Mario Brothers movie.
It's Universal and Illumination, isn't it?
Yes, which does frighten me a little bit, because while Illumination, you know, has done some things that I have enjoyed, they've also done some things that kind of make me seem like they're kind of just milking this style of film a bit too much, and they're kind of getting less and less funny as time goes on. So I am a little concerned, even with Nintendo being involved, because sometimes they don't even really know what gamers want, let alone as far as telling a story and filmmaking and everything like that, though. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because I think in 2019, because video games are widely more accepted and a lot more people play them, a lot more people understand them, including filmmakers. So hopefully when they take these properties on again, they're doing the right thing. So keep your fingers crossed.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 10.
Moving on to number 10 is Vice from Annapurna Pictures, down from number 7. The film took in just under $3.3 million for a 42.8% drop from last week for a $1,900 per screen average, bringing its cume up to just a touch under $36 million. Now, this film is seemingly one of the only films that didn't benefit from the awards season bump. I mean, Christian Bale wins Best Actor for his portrayal of Dick Cheney, and yet we see both a theater drop and a drop in box office take for the weekend. What do you think the reasoning is behind that? I mean, it could possibly be just critical and audience takes on it. The film is not widely loved. It's got a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes and a C+ cinema score. So both critics and audiences are kind of lukewarm to it. They find it middle of the pack. I mean, what's your take on it? Why is Vice underperforming?
I mean, I could only guess at this point, you know, like for me, I look at someone like Christian Bale and I say, like, that dude can act. He's completely transformative in anything that he does, you know, whether it's American Psycho, or if he's doing the Dark Knight stuff, or if he's in The Prestige, or if he's The Machinist, or whatever. He's a fantastic actor. I think that, yes, the critical response is probably partially responsible. I think the fact that we're living in a world right now where people are sort of maybe looking at politics and saying, I've got no interest in seeing that. Or it could just be the fact that people are just sort of sick of hearing about politics in their normal day-to-day lives, regardless of what their party stance is anyway. You know, I mean, this is the third week that this film's been out. We're looking at a total gross right now of, as you said, close to $36 million. It's not great. I mean, this film had a budget of $60 million. That's a little concerning, I guess. I mean, I'm sure Christian Bale is really happy with his output, and anybody who's seen the film, and even though they walked away from it, said, you know, it was just okay, but everybody comes out of that saying, but Christian Bale, oh my God, I didn't even recognize it was him, you know, that sort of thing. So there's only so much, I guess, that star power in a film like this, I guess it can only take you so far.
Number 9.
Yeah, moving on to number 9, we have one of probably the biggest stars in Hollywood, both in front of or behind a camera. At number 9, we have The Mule from Warner Brothers, down from number 6 this week, taking in just over $5.5 million, 39% drop from last week. It did get a little bit of a theater pad. It added 117 screens to its count, just under $1,700 per screen average to bring its cume up to $90.5 million. Now, this film is, of course, we're talking about Clint Eastwood, who not only plays the lead in the film, but also directs the film. This brings up an interesting conversation, because last week I got into a conversation with Chris Schiller, who was our guest host last week, about The Mule being another one of those films in the trend of aging actors kind of planning out like this kind of swan song film where, you know, they're on camera in a very comfortable role for them, and it's all just kind of a wink and a nod and a kind of nudge to the entire library of their work. Is that kind of the feeling you get? I mean, is this going to be one of the last times we see Clint Eastwood in front of the camera, but we'll still see him behind the camera, or what do you think?
I mean, I heard that conversation. I hadn't read any stories in particular that sort of pointed in that direction. So I almost feel like maybe that take is a response to just him being super old. So it's really impressive to see him doing so much work, you know, behind the camera and on screen at the same time. But in that respect, I'm not sure that this would be the end for him unless he's just like, you know, I'm like Danny Glover. I'm too old for this stuff, you know? Like, I mean, he's a fantastic filmmaker. Anytime that he makes a movie, like, I'm totally down. And when I saw the trailer for this and I was like, oh, a Clint Eastwood joint? Yeah, I'm going to see that. So I'm very interested in this. Whatever he decides to do, both, you know, in front of camera or behind it, I hope he stays behind the camera if he's going to choose one or the other, you know, because his films are fantastic. But I think partially what makes his film so good is his on-screen presence, though, at the same time. I don't know. So I'm kind of torn, actually.
Yeah. I mean, and you're not the only one. I mean, you look at the numbers for The Mule. I mean, right now it's got a 65% on Rotten Tomatoes. So again, middle of the pack, kind of average, lukewarm reception by the critics, but cinema score of A-. That means the people who are seeing this feel the same way. It's Clint Eastwood. They love seeing him on screen. They in any capacity, they love seeing him play Clint Eastwood on screen. I do think that this film continues on the course it's at, which it's, you know, it's already up to $90.5 million, as I mentioned, on a $50 million budget. But I think that this could be kind of a dark horse going into the Academy Award nominations. I feel like this film has to get nominated for something. If this is a swan song for Clint Eastwood, whether in front of the camera, behind the camera, or something like that, somebody in the Academy knows. Somebody on the inside knows. And even if it's just for nostalgia's sake, I see The Mule picking up nominations either for Clint Eastwood as an actor or Clint Eastwood as a director. But that remains to be seen. We're still a couple weeks off from Academy Award nominations being announced.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Like, I mean, I understand at some point when somebody's kind of reaching a point in their career where you expect them to be like, okay, like I've been around for a really long time and I'm not sure I can really do this anymore. This may be it for me, at least as far as public perception is concerned of someone's career. I don't want to see anybody get an award just because it's like, you know, you've earned it. You know, just because of your reputation and how long you've been doing this stuff and how beloved your filmography is. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Unless it's, you know, like a lifetime achievement award or something like that, then sure. But I don't want to see The Mule earn nominations if critics don't genuinely feel that there's aspects of this film that it doesn't need to be nominated for. But that said, you know, this is another one of those movies where, like, I totally have to see this because, yes, I love Clint Eastwood films, both old and new alike. So I think his acting is great. I think he's a very good director, and the story here is it kind of might be why this film maybe isn't striking a chord with people who are coming out and saying it's not great. I feel like his films as he's aging are sort of making a point to make very specific messages about our world at the time. I think that turns people off to a certain degree because they're like, don't get preachy with your stuff, man. And this movie is about a 90-year-old Korean War vet who's, you know, kind of estranged from his family and he needs money. So he kind of does the Breaking Bad thing and gets in the drugs, you know, and of course that turns into other things that sort of parallel with what's going on in our modern world today. So that might turn people off to a certain degree, but without seeing the film, I can't really say if things are ham-fisted in a storytelling perspective or not. But I'm sure it should probably be nominated for something, though. That's just my gut instinct. But if people, again, don't feel like it deserves it, then please don't.
Number 8.
Moving on to the countdown to number 8, up from number 16 this week. On the Basis of Sex from Focus Features takes in $6.2 million, an increase of 286.9%, but gaining 1,811 theaters, bringing its total to 1,923 theaters. It averaged 3,200 per screen and has brought its cume up to $10.5 million. And as I said last week on the show, I mean, who would have thought in 2019 that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was going to be such a marketable commodity when she's already had one film based on her in RBG that came out last year, and here we are again on the Basis of Sex from Focus Features. I do feel like this film will be a bit of a award season darling moving into the Academy Awards and the Spirit Awards and whatnot. To see this film performing as well as it is, and the bigger point to me is to see Focus Features creating and distributing films that I want to see again is very heartwarming for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of goes back to the running theme of some of the films that conversations that we already had on the show. show, is that it's 2019. A lot of things have happened over the last couple few years, and to have a film that basically focuses on, empowerment, but since this is a story about, focusing on bringing to light gender discrimination and trying to move up from that point in history, and we're still working on it to this day, I think that certainly helps. It's one of those things that, again, people need to see messages like that in their films, and they're going to respond very positively to that these days. But of course, considering the fact that it also, as you said, seems to be a critical darling, people are walking away from this film otherwise just casual film goers, and they're happy with what they've seen. Positive buzz about the acting in the film as well. It all adds up to numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit of a further expansion in next week's box office as well, just based on the performance this week.
Number 7.
At number 7, down from number 4, is Bumblebee from Paramount, taking in $6.7 million, a 48% drop from last week, bringing in about $2,000 per screen for a cum of $108.4 million. Now, last week I said that this film was going to suffer from a theater drop because of making room for the award season winners and nominees, and that seems to be the case. Didn't lose as many theaters as I thought it was going to lose, but enough to warrant about a 50% drop from the last weekend, the last frame.
Yeah, I thought it would have lost a little bit more too myself.
You can't look at Bumblebee as not a part of the property and the franchise of Transformers, which, based on that, Bumblebee is and will remain the lowest entrant in that franchise, in that property. I know it was marketed differently. I know that everything was marketed to not specifically brand it as Transformers. That is, of course, except for the toys. The toy line, very much so, has Transformers plastered all over it, because that's where something like Transformers or Bumblebee, they make their money in the toys.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's something that I noticed just a week or so ago. I was at the local Walmart, and there was one of those end cap cardboard bins that just had a bunch of stuff in it, and I think it was like pillows and blankets and stuff like that, but you had Bumblebee's picture plastered all over it because Bumblebee is the movie that's out right now, but the name Bumblebee was really nowhere to be seen. It was just Transformers in these big, huge letters. And then I was looking in the toy section for my son for toys that he likes. And again, just Transformers just slathered all over the marketing packaging and everything like that. So yeah, the studio's not dumb. They know that Transformers sells to the kids. So anything marketing wise is going to have because they think people are going to be confused, I guess, when they see a big robotic car on the packaging or something. It has to be spelled out for them that it's Transformers, I guess. I don't know.
Number 6.
Moving on to the countdown to number 6, down from number 3 this week, is Mary Poppins Returns from Buena Vista and Disney. The film took in $7.2 million, just under a 55% drop from last week for a $2,200 per screen average. It brings its cum up to $150.6 million. So this film is in its 4th week of release, and it's difficult for me to root for this film. I know I'm going to end up seeing the film because my daughter wants to see it and my wife wants to see it. We're all going to go see it at some point, because this is another one of those intellectual properties that I feel had a sequel when no one asked for it. I'm sure that visually there's a lot of really good things about it, but I just feel like this film is capitalizing solely off of the predecessor and the original intellectual property with Julie Andrews. I think they're relying entirely on its predecessor's audience and the children they now have.
Yeah, that kind of, I guess, trends with a lot of other return for franchises these days, right? Star Wars The Force Awakens. Hey, let's do the same thing. We'll change it a little bit, but we'll more or less tell the same story because people are going to get in the seats based on nostalgia. Jurassic World, when it came back, it was very much the same thing. So I guess that sort of also applies to when you're bringing back an old franchise like Mary Poppins, because younger audiences today, they know who Mary Poppins is based on the original film if their parents sat them down to watch it. It's not something that a kid's going to be like, man, I want to watch Mary Poppins. Yeah, I see what you're saying. When I saw that trailer, it did seem to be very rehashy of the original Mary Poppins film. How is this going to shake out for the studio, though, is what I want to know. I mean, right now, 4 weeks in, down 54% this week, right? It's got a total gross right now of 150 mil. Its budget was 130, and it certainly had enough marketing. So is this losing money, Sean?
I mean, when you take into account worldwide gross, it's close. It's up to just under 290 million worldwide. So it's close. I think that with lack of other family-based films on the horizon, I think Mary Poppins gets to stick around for a bit longer. I don't see drastic drops moving forward. I think this drop mainly stemmed from the 837 theater drop itself. I don't think it had so much to do with just a lack of interest in it. I mean, there needs to be a family film out there. I think the combination of the theater drop and something like A Dog's Way Home, which we'll get to, is what damaged Mary Poppins. But I also see A Dog's Way Home dropping faster than Mary Poppins just because of the branding that Mary Poppins has versus A Dog's Way Home. I would have liked to have seen Mary Poppins Returns. It would have been nice to see it take an approach similar to another Disney Buena Vista title release that came out last year, which was Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin was a completely different story, a completely different take. It took Pooh out of this animated world and brought him into the real world with real grown-up problems, real adult problems. I kind of wish that they had taken a different approach the way they took a different approach in releasing Christopher Robin with Mary Poppins Returns.
That's an interesting opinion. I agree with you in some respects and I disagree in others. I do think that Christopher Robin, I think what they did there worked as well as it did, at least from a critical standpoint, because I think it worked. I know some people feel different ways about that film, but I think that film worked, you know, and I definitely appreciate the very bold change in tone for storytelling and even the stage that's set for, you know, something that Winnie the Pooh is involved in. But at the same time, Mary Poppins Returns, I'm not sure that would have been something that they could have done. It's tricky because you have a lot of people who have numerous generations who have grown up watching that film and loving it for what it was. So you want to get those people in the seats, and then you also want it to be entertaining to the children. So you also have to keep it nice and light and airy and fun. If you made a serious Mary Poppins film, something that was tonally different, I'm not sure it would have been one of those films that would have appealed to anyone. Yeah, that's interesting.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 5.
So moving on to the countdown to number 5, down from number 2 this week is Escape Room from Sony, taking in $8.9 million, about a 51% drop from last week, which was its opening weekend, for a per-screen average of $3,276 and a cum of $32.4 million. Now, this film, on a $9 million budget, Sony must be very happy.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of those genre films that was made on a budget appropriate to what it is. I mean, $9 million is, you know, on par with a lot of different horror films of the last few years. To compare it to something last year, they had the Happy Death Day, you know, was a genre film that was made for about the same, about $9 or $10 million, and had a great return, much like Escape Room, and has a sequel coming out this year. So I assume we're going to see an Escape Room sequel, should the ending lend itself to one, or it doesn't have to.
Another similar financial take was actually the return of the Saw franchise, which is what this kind of echoes, I believe. At the end of 2017, they brought that franchise back after a hiatus with Jigsaw. That film had a $10 million budget and box office was $103 million. So yeah, they definitely chose the right sort of marketing, although I feel this film was a little bit more of a risk all the same, because even though it looks fun, when I see a trailer like this, and I know maybe not everybody's the same, but when I see a trailer for a film like Escape Room, I say, well, that's just going to be a Saw clone. Like, how good can that be? But apparently people are having fun with it.
Oh, I mean, it's a formula that works again and again, which is why it's a formula and why it works. I mean,
get a bunch of stupid people together and kill them.
Yeah. I mean, that formula has been working since the 1980s when Friday the 13th and, you know, Nightmare on Elm Streets were coming out. You get a bunch of dumb campers who are young and fooling around and having sex and not paying attention, and they get killed. That's what happens. It'll be a profit-making machine for Sony for at least 2 or 3 films, I imagine. We'll see how good the second one does.
Oh, yeah. As long as they keep, you know, staying at a decent budget and they just keep making, you know, $40 million in returns, you know, like if you're going again by the double, you know, for marketing rule, you know, they're easily doubling their investment on this product. It'll be interesting to see narratively how Escape Room is. Like, I'll see it when it comes out on Blu-ray or whatever, but like, I wonder if it's got narrative legs to keep doing this, you know, 2, 3, 4 times.
Number 4.
Moving on to the countdown, we're up to number 4 now. At number 4, up from number 5, is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, also from Sony, which took in $9 million, only a 31% drop from last week, for a per-screen average of just under $3,000 and a cum of $147.7 million. Spider-Man took home a Golden Globe last week for Best Animated Feature, deservingly so. I am surprised, though, that even with winning the award as the Best Animated Feature, that here we are looking at not only a theater drop, but a drop, albeit a small one, from its take last weekend. Could have something to do with the fact that it's now its 5th week in release, but what's your take on this? This one you have to see. I'm letting you know now, when this comes out, you have to see this.
Oh, and I totally will. I was on board with this ever since I saw the first trailer. Not before I saw the trailer, though. I had to wonder what Sony was thinking, because it's like, okay, we'll let Spider-Man be part of the Marvel verse and everything, but we're going to do our own Spider-Verse. And like, how are you going to do that simultaneously when Marvel's got Spider-Man and you're going to do your own thing? How is that possibly going to work? Especially since I would imagine there was some sort of franchise fatigue going on, because Raimi had his Spider-Man trilogy and then they rebooted with 2 amazing Spider-Man films. And it's like,
which were not amazing. They were not amazing.
Not at all. And you're going to do this again so soon after the fact? Like, how is this going to work? And then the news came out, well, the first Spider-Man film we're going to do is an animated feature. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be terrible. I'm like, this is probably going to be like a straight to video thing, right? Like the DC animated films that they do. Nope. It was going to be a CGI thing. It was going to be a big budgeted film for animation and everything. And when I saw the trailer, it all made sense. I was like, what they're doing here looks entertaining. It looks like it's got good action. It looks like it's got good characters. It looks like it has good everything. They've made an animated film which looks entertaining and fun as hell, but at the same time makes every single iteration of Spider-Man that exists out there canonical. So this is the perfect, most genius way for them to sort of be like, yeah, every story that we've told, it's all part of the same thing. They're just different dimensions or different, universes or whatever, different alternate realities. Like that's pretty genius.
But that was the interesting thing about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, especially with it being Sony. Sony really likes to take Marvel's toys and break them. And so I was really worried that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was going to be the next toy of Marvel's that Sony broke. But the complete opposite happened. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I said this last week, is probably my favorite Spider-Man movie since Spider-Man 2 in the Sam Raimi trilogy.
Yeah, I could see that.
This certainly leads itself up to have its own sequel, which I'm sure will happen, and I'll go see that one too. As long as they stick to what they did very strongly in this film, and that was just this style. I suspect that Spider-Man will be sticking around in this countdown for quite a bit as it continues to just print money at this point.
This is major superhero power. This is Spider-Man, and considering the fact that the film is doing so well critically and from just regular film goers alike, that's going to be something. And I think people are going to be really happy in the future as well, seeing what they're going to be doing with this universe of Spider-Man in particular, because reading it off of Wikipedia here, by the end of November, Sony was developing a sequel and several spin-offs from the film due to the incredible buzz surrounding it. So we're definitely going to see more of this style of film from them for Spider-Man.
At the box office, though, it's not matching up, and I don't know if that's because it's animated versus live action, so maybe it loses some of its audience in there. But I mean, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, when all is said and done, will likely be the lowest entrant in the 7 theatrically released Spider-Man movies. I don't think that should directly correlate to the quality of the film. I think this film is quality-wise better than more than half of them, but for some reason, just at the box office, it's not translating to the same big dollars that the live-action counterparts did.
It's kind of a pricey proposition for families to take their kids to the movies these days. If my wife and I, for example, wanted to take our oldest son to the movies, we can't bring our youngest because he's not even 2 years old yet. So number one, we'd have to line up a babysitter, and then we go to the movies, and depending on if a movie's 3D or not, we could be spending, $10, maybe $15 for a ticket for each of us. Then there's the popcorn, and not everybody wants popcorn. Somebody's going to want nachos. Somebody's going to want candy. Then there's the drink. I want water. I want fruit punch. I want soda. It's like, it's a fortune. And especially around the holidays, I'm sure that families aren't super budgeted to be able to well, let's hit this movie this weekend, that movie the next weekend, and that movie the next. So if everybody took their kid to the safe bet to see Ralph Breaks the Internet because there was a little bit of trepidation as to how good Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse could be, maybe that had something to play. Maybe that had a part to play. I don't know.
Number 3.
So now moving on to number 3, talking about tugging on heartstrings. Here is A Dog's Way Home, also from Sony. Sony pulling the hat trick in the top 5 this week. A Dog's Way Home in its opening weekend pulls in 11.3 million on just over 3,000 screens for a per theater average of $3,657. This film is the cliched, family movie to go see. It's the same author who writes A Dog's Way Home also writes A Dog's Purpose, and there are a couple other books that these films are based off of that are all dog stories. They're all dog centric, with a narrator saying funny, cute things about how dogs would say and think if we could hear them.
These movies about the dog that's separated from the family, and they make the journey home, and they have a narrator because the dog has a voice. Ooh, it's just the same movie for me over and over and over again. I can't do it.
I am very aware of the fact that I will likely be seeing this movie one way or another. Caters to the same people like my daughter who watch things like Pup Star and Air Bud and Santa Paws and things like that. I know I'm going to be seeing this movie, and Sony knows that you're going to be seeing this movie because its opening weekend, as I said, $11.3 million on an $18 million budget. I imagine that by next weekend, it'll have crossed $20 million. It'll have a good second weekend. I think that, as I said earlier, it will drop at a quicker pace than something with a built-in brand like a Mary Poppins or a Ralph
Spider-Man.
Or Spider-Man.
Yep.
It'll certainly make its money, I feel. And if not in theatrical, in every kid who wants that movie to watch it on Netflix, or every kid who wants to watch that movie on DVD or Blu-ray, they're looking at a profit. It's another one of those genre formulaic films that you appropriate the right amount of budget to, that the math tells you can make that much money back.
Yeah, and it's interesting looking at the budget for a lot of these films. Like the studios, like another thing that a lot of people don't realize about movie making is that it's not just, we like this idea, here's $18 million for a budget. It's like they have people behind the scenes who look at the numbers, who do research, who basically get the lay of the land, so that they can make a very accurate assessment of what should the budget for this be? How much are we going to be willing to spend on this, on production, on the marketing? What's going to be a safe enough bet for us? Sometimes they lose that bet, but these are very, very informed decisions that studios make.
Number 2.
Moving on to number 2, speaking of our favorite friend of the ocean, Aquaman. Aquaman comes in at number 2, being dethroned after 3 weeks at the top of the box office. Aquaman from Warner Brothers, $17.2 million, a 44% drop, with still a per theater average of $4,469, bringing its domestic cume up to $287.8 million. The bigger story here is that this weekend, Aquaman crosses the $1 billion mark worldwide, the first DC title to do so. Looking at these numbers, looking at Aquaman, and as I said this last week, to me, it's a great feat for Aquaman to reach at the box office. As a film, it entertained me, but it still felt like DC is trying really hard to be like Marvel and not find their own voice with this particular film.
Yeah, that's such a loaded debate to have because, yeah, you could say that it's probably reactionary, because one of the major complaints that you heard when Batman v Superman came out and that movie was just destroyed critically was it's too dark, it's too moody, and part of that has to do not just because it was dark and moody, but because Zack Snyder was attached to it, and that's sort of his MO. Watchmen, Sucker Punch, 300, it's like, oh, just Zack Snydering all over this film. I feel like if Batman v Superman came out and cut out a lot of the Lex Luthor stuff and just let Superman and Batman fight, because they had enough of a reason to be mad at each other to begin with, okay? You didn't need Luthor's intervention except to introduce the rest of the DC Universe characters in a 5-minute segment. They just threw in way too much. They were trying to catch up to Marvel in one shot. If that movie did better, if they were smarter with that movie, people would be singing a very different tune about that universe, but it's just the movies were not great. I guess it doesn't even matter at this point, right? Like before Aquaman even came out, the thing that I was saying to myself was, I don't know how this movie's gonna do. It's Aquaman. This is the dude who talks to fish, like yeah. You could pretend like, oh, I've always been an Aqua fan my entire life. No, you haven't, you liar. Nobody's favorite comics, hero has ever been Aquaman. How is Aquaman going to carry a movie by himself? But when the trailer for this movie came out, it's like, ooh, this looks really fun and over the top, and just like they just threw money at the screen. That could actually work. And just in general, people love Jason Momoa anyway. He's a presence on the screen. People liked him in shows like Game of Thrones and the other movies that he's been in. Batman, and he just seems to be a likable dude outside of the films, like in real life too. But Aquaman, it's incredible because I thought this was going to be the barometer. I know last week you guys had a conversation on the show saying like maybe that's a lot to put on this film, but I did think Aquaman was the barometer for what they were going to be doing with this universe from here on out. Because with Aquaman, if this film bombed, does anybody really think that they were going to be pressing forward with the rest of the films that they were planning minus Wonder Woman 2? Probably not, you know, and at this point, even the audience that goes to see these movies, if they saw this movie and walked away unhappy, they would be done with this franchise too.
Yeah, but I think what's going to happen now is I think that people who watch Aquaman, maybe they've never been turned on to any of the DC properties until seeing Aquaman. Maybe Aquaman was the first one that brings them in. Now they see Aquaman, they have an expectation. Now the brand of DC is just going to seesaw because we're going to go right back to a more darker DC. I mean, maybe not so much with Wonder Woman 1984, but definitely when The Batman comes out, there's no way you can make a light Batman. It doesn't happen. You can't.
You hit the nail on the head, because if this is what people take away from seeing Aquaman, DC films are shifting. Yeah, they've already announced that they're going to start filming The Batman in November of this year. So how is that going to work? Are you going to just hope that people still want the dark Batman? Or are you going to try and interweave some comedy bits into it? These little zingy one-liners that were in Batman v Superman or Justice League with Bruce Wayne? Or are you going to just kind of go for broke and make like Adam West style Batman in 2019 with a big budget? You know, like I'm going to assume they're going to go the darker route, but hopefully people are like, Batman's allowed to be dark, but you know what? Do something about the rest of your films.
Number 1.
Here we are. We've made it. We're at number 1 on the countdown. And this week at number 1, and what I would definitely call an upset, is The Upside from STX Entertainment, taking in $19.5 million, which is nearly double the industry and studio expectations going into the weekend. The film was on 3,080 theaters and averaged 6,300 per screen, as I said, for an opening weekend of $19.5 million, just under $19.6 million. This marks STX Entertainment's first number 1 box office release. Did they just get everything right? Was it a combination of marketing and star power? I mean, I know it's Bryan Cranston and Kevin Hart, who we have a little bit to discuss about Kevin Hart now that we're in the awards season. What did STX get right, do you think, that made it not only meet but exceed the expectations of not only themselves, but the industry as a whole?
It's 40% from critics, right? But the audience score is 89%. So it's got to be positive word of mouth from the people who aren't critics going to see this movie that's carrying this thing over the weekend. I really don't know, because this is a mystery to me. I thought this movie was not going to do very well on its first weekend because there's a number of things happening. Number one, this is one of those remakes that people aren't really aware is a remake. It's a remake, I believe, of a foreign film.
I wasn't even aware it was a remake, so I'm one of those people.
And I think this film was actually supposed to be released maybe back as far as 2017, but there was some stuff going on with the Harvey Weinstein stuff, which I think kind of halted its progression from actually being released.
I almost thought this film was going to get delayed further yet because of all the controversy surrounding Kevin Hart right now and his stepping down from the Academy Awards, again, because of something he said in the past that has been brought up to haunt him.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was actually going to be something that was going to pop up. But yes, the Kevin Hart stuff was definitely something that I thought was going to impact its opening weekend. And not only that, but there's been another controversy actually this past week on social media, because in an interview, Bryan Cranston has basically had to defend himself as playing a handicapped person in a film instead of somebody who's actually handicapped. God. So, I mean, that was another I said earlier that it's like, okay, like, you know, I think everything needs to be taken on a case by case basis. I think I'm kind of okay with Bryan Cranston playing a handicapped person. You know, I was okay with Scarlett Johansson playing, you know, the Major in Ghost in the Shell. Like, and by the way, just to back up a tick, the story was this movie was originally to be distributed by the Weinstein Company in March of 2018. It got shelved because of the Harvey Weinstein sexual allegations. So STX picked it up. But yeah, between Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston stuff going on, I thought it was going to hurt the film this weekend. And for me personally, I'm not interested in seeing this film because, you know what? I'm not a Kevin Hart fan at all. Anything that he's in, I'm just kind of like, I guess I'm going to tap out, because I just feel like he's always on and he's always Kevin Hart playing Kevin Hart. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Even when he's doing interviews and stuff. It's like, it's the same dude that you see in the films. I don't know. I think this film for me might have reached me marketing wise better if they had a character alongside Bryan Cranston that was a bit more measured in their approach to comedy.
Great opening frame of the box office for the upside. Does it keep it up?
Should I even wager a guess at this point? I thought this movie wasn't even going to do that good on opening weekend. So I feel like my opinion at this point is just going to be like, whatever, you know, like I'm going to say it's going to depend on word of mouth, I suppose, but I'm going to guess that it's going to drop next weekend. I'm going to guess it's going to drop. I mean, I think maybe it won't drop as much as I would think it would drop, but I think it's going to drop, and it'll probably find its way down on the list more than just a couple of spots.
So now looking ahead to next weekend, we have only one new wide release. So it's pretty clear to me who's going to be number one next week, as Glass opens in roughly 3,500 or more theaters next week. Not much to debate here. I'm sure you agree with me. Glass is number one?
I think Glass definitely has potential to come in at number one. I think that old stink of M. Night Shyamalan from, you know, The Village and whatnot from back in the day is off of him at this point, and people really did like Unbreakable, and I know a lot of people are pumped up for this film. They like the last movie that he did, which ties in with this one. So yeah, I think number one's probably a pretty easy guess.
I think M. Night Shyamalan's had a bit of a resurgence as well. I mean, I think a lot of that stinks off because, you know, he went back to making, you know, a little bit smaller budget films that work on telling a story and not always just relying on some twist that you pulled out of a hat. You know, Split did incredibly well. I mean, no one expected Split to do what it did, but it did. And I'm sure that has large in part to do with M. Night Shyamalan's storytelling, but also just as much credit goes to James McAvoy for playing as many roles as he did.
Yeah, he's an amazing actor for sure.
But prior to that, on a much smaller scale, M. Night Shyamalan put out The Visit earlier that year before Split.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
No one expected that to do anything. There was like hardly any marketing put behind it.
Especially with the premise. It's like, oh, you're going to grandma's house. Like, nobody expected that was going to like review well, but people walked away from that. Yeah, you're right. People walked away pretty happy with that movie.
That about wraps it up for us this week here at the Weekend Take. I want to again thank Mike Zupan for coming on to the show, and be sure to check out Bite Size Impressions and Bite Size Cinema. In posting the episode, I'll be sure to put links up to Bite Size Impression website. You can also follow him on Twitter at Bite Size Imp, BYTESIZEIMP. Be sure to also follow the Weekend Take on Twitter at Weekend Take. We are also on Facebook and YouTube as well. And now the show is approved and listed here on iTunes and Google Play. Mike, thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And that wraps it up for us. So until next week, we'll see you all later.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.